Last week I hit Legend in Hearthstone with a budget aggro paladin deck. Pretty much spontaneously after a long break. And to be honest, instead of feeling proud, I mostly felt a very specific kind of disappointment. Not because the deck was bad, not because the climb was super hard, and not because aggro paladin is some deep, misunderstood art form. I felt disappointed because this grind reminded me once again that modern Hearthstone is slowly turning into a brain-dead RNG fiesta where classes increasingly stop feeling like classes and start feeling like weirdly flavored versions of the same over-designed nonsense. Let's see, I hope he can't cast 5 random spells. Okay. Draw 2 cards. Summon 2. Oh my gosh, okay, this is bad now. So, Hearthstone has some problems, and we are going to talk about them in this video. But, you know what is the worst part? A cheap linear deck like this doesn't just survive in this environment, it makes perfect sense in it. So let's talk a little bit about the climb and why hitting Legend with this deck felt less like an achievement and more like a gamble in a casino. Now, first of all, let me be very clear. I stopped playing Hearthstone actively for pretty much 2 years now and thought to myself, which deck can I craft relatively cheaply and get some results in a potential climb? I don't like completely RNG BS decks like Casino Mages or something and want to feel more control and tactics behind setups. Also, it needs to be something fast that does not rely on dragging the game until turn 10 or higher. So after some research, my decision was clear. It needs to be an aggro deck. Specifically, the aggro paladin. Don't get me wrong, this was not some noble challenge run, even though I reached Legend in under 5 days. This was not, can I prove my superior deck building genius with only common cards and my pure heart? No, I wanted something super cheap and annoying enough to get the job done in a short period of time. That's it, and somehow I did it in under a week into the season start, where half of the time was the infamous back and forth during the last 5 diamond ranks, where you are not getting any win streak bonuses anymore. You may ask yourself, okay, but what are you trying to tell me now? I want to discuss 2 main problems that modern Hearthstone has in my opinion, and what should change before the whole meta in this game goes completely downhill. You may agree or disagree with me, but after the climb, I came to the conclusion that the budget aggro paladin is basically the fast food menu of Hearthstone leathering. Cheap ingredients, no legendaries or anything, questionable nutrition with low cost minions getting buffed with fast steroids and create short bursts of dopamine, but somehow it is efficient and keeps working. And in a healthier game that would be completely fine. Aggro decks have always existed, cheap decks have also always existed. That's not the issue. The issue is what it says about the game when one of the most effective ways to climb is to ignore as much of the game's creative depth as possible and just run people over before the random fiesta even begins. Because, let's be honest, once the game goes long enough, you are not always playing against a class anymore. You are playing against RNG, weird discovery chains, awkward hero cards, and bullshit value that comes literally out of nowhere. I faced a rogue, for example, that turned into 2 different hunter heroes in one matchup. And nope, it was not in wild mode, it was all in standard mode. We come to this problem later. We had a weaker start, a way weaker start than him. I'm still not sure how we dominated him. So what about the actual climb? Exactly what you would expect. Some games were over before they even started. Some opponents looked like they were trying to do something cool, thoughtful, maybe even fun. And I was just there sitting and thinking like, yeah, cool, very nice, very creative. Anyway, here's 14 face damage in round 3 or 4, right? That's kind of the problem. A lot of the time, it didn't feel like I was outplaying people. It felt like I was taking advantage of how bloated and unstable the whole meta feels. Because when the game becomes too weird, too random, too top heavy, and too full of swing turns and value nonsense, simple aggression starts looking like less degeneracy and more like viable self-defense. And that's not exactly a glowing endorsement of the meta. There were games where I won because I curved out properly, sure. I would say I played pretty much optimal. But there's also the before mentioned issue. There were lots of games where I looked at what the opponent was doing and thought to myself, what exactly is your class again? And I don't mean that in a fun old school way where every class had a weird niche. I mean it in the modern way, where every class can suddenly generate random answers, discover extra cards, pull some absurd survival tool out of nowhere, and transform the entire game with a hero or payoff card that feels like way too over the top. I mean, come on, a druid who tries to board control with Protoss minions? An automaton priest that spams 3 to 4 robots until round 4 and just chip kills you? A mage whose deck is completely RNG from round 1 onwards with no real purpose or direction? A DH all of a sudden generating 28 armor right before dying through a spaceship? What the heck is this all? Are we playing in the universe of World of Warcraft or Star Wars here? I know, some might say it's flashy, it's loud, it may even look cool. But in my opinion, it is in 90% of the time completely incoherent. And now let's talk about the first huge problem for a while, the amount of RNG involved nowadays. People always say, huh, well, Hearthstone always had RNG. Yes, of course it did. Like any other card game. RNG has always been part of Hearthstone's identity, don't get me wrong, it's nothing new. The problem is that it used to feel like spice, you know what I mean. But now it often feels like the entire meal. That's the difference. Let me explain what I mean if you haven't experienced this yourself. He's relying completely, it's completely RNG, but it wonders me that he went so high with it. Like, how is he on diamond with that deck, man? Old RNG in Hearthstone often felt like a swing, a risk, a funny moment, an occasional disaster. Fun and cool and dandy, right? Now on the other hand, modern RNG often feels like the engine itself, the backup plan, the winning condition and a bit also like the excuse. Sometimes it feels like both players are just spinning a giant casino wheel and waiting to see whose over-designed nonsense lands first. You are not super carefully navigating a class matchup. You are surviving a sequence of increasingly unhinged events. And to be fair, sometimes that's funny. Sometimes it is entertaining. But entertaining and strategically satisfying are really not the same thing most of the times. And when I hit Legend with a cheap aggro paladin deck, what I felt wasn't, wow, this deck is so deep. What I felt was, yeah, this is what happens when the smartest response to chaos is to end the game before the circus fully arrives. A gamble in any matchup basically, that I had a strong build up from round 1 on and get my Crusader aura through as early as possible with a decent board, to finish off the game in round 5 to 6 optimally. The bigger issue for me is not even the RNG by itself, it's the loss also of class identity. That's what really bothers me. Because old Hearthstone, even when it was unfair, even when it was dumb sometimes, and even when it was extremely rude to your mental health, it still had stronger class identity. The heroes had clearer limits. They had weaknesses, they had blind spots, they had things they were supposed to be good at, and some that they were bad at. That was part of what made most matchups interesting. But nowadays, a lot of classes feel less like classes, and more like loosely themed packages of power spikes, random generation bots, and emergency buttons. Everything has become so flexible, so padded, so covered in backup value that sometimes the only real identity left is the portrait, which often doesn't fit into the universe of classic World of Warcraft in any shape or form anymore. Everything needs to be streamlined, everything needs to be homogeneous, everything needs to be equal with no originality or identity, right? You get this strange situation where the game feels flashy before coherent, busy before meaningful, and over-the-top artificial designed before actually smart. This fucking lucker, I hope he can't clear. Spell damage plus 7. Wow. Wow. Remorseless Winter plus 9. 9 damage to all enemies for fucking 2 mana. I hope I'm not the only one thinking like this, but I don't want every class to do everything. I don't want every match to feel like I'm queuing into Surprise Mechanic Generator Simulator, where there's a full RNG deck for basically all classes available. I just want classes to feel like classes again. I want their wins to feel like their wins. Not just another version of, yeah, here are 6 extra resources from a completely different class and a glowing button. By the way, did I told you this was all in standard mode? So whatever shenanigans you want to do it in a wild mode, but keep the standard mode more original. How about that idea maybe? Anyways, coming back to the aggro paladin and why he actually made sense for me in this meta. This deck is not beautiful, not heavily overdesigned, not flashy or shiny, but rational and efficient. Because when a game gets too full of weird swing turns, over-designed payoffs, identity blur and random nonsense, you start asking a very simple question. Why am I participating in all of this? Why am I signing up for a 12-turn science experiment when I could just put stats on the board, force pretty much scripted early answers, and make the other guy prove they actually drew one of their counter solutions? Aggro isn't always brain dead, but in a format like this, it often becomes the most emotionally intelligent choice. Because instead of letting the game drag you into its weird carnival of generated nonsense, you just say, nope, we are doing damage now, you either have your AoE answer or you don't. And if you do have it, fine, at least I only lost in 5 or 6 minutes. That's the hidden beauty of cheap aggro in a broken feeling ecosystem. It respects your time, even if it doesn't respect your opponent. And honestly, that's more than I can say for some of the current design philosophy. And this is also why hitting Legend this time felt kinda weird. Because normally hitting Legend should feel like improvement, mastery, momentum, some kind of reward, right? But this climb mostly made me feel like I had found the shortest path through a game I trust a little less nowadays than I used to back then. That's the uncomfortable truth. Yes, I climbed, yes, the deck worked, yes, cheap decks matter and should exist, but instead of making me feel excited about Hearthstone, it mostly reminded me of how much of the current experience feels like managing randomness, enduring over-designed nonsense, and trying to identify which parts of the game still actually belong to the class you queued with or against. That's not a great sign, man. And it's definitely not the feeling I want after reaching the highest achievable rank in this game. Sitting in a boat with top 1% players and thinking like, man, this was just a shallow numbers game where 95% was defined by RNG and the skill component got nearly completely erased from the equation. This doesn't really motivate someone to go further in this meta, you know? So yeah, I hit Legend with a budget aggro paladin, pretty much spontaneously. And maybe that says something about me. Maybe it says I'm practical, maybe it says I'm lazy, maybe it says I have the soul of a leather goblin. But more than anything, I think it says something about Hearthstone. Because the weirdest part of this climb is not that the cheap deck got there. The weirdest part is that it felt so completely logical in a game that increasingly feels less about class identity, less about clean strategy, and more about surviving an over-designed, semi-random fireworks show long enough to pretend it still has some kind of center. I reached Legend, sure, but more than anything, this run made me miss when classes actually felt like classes. And that, to me, is the real problem. If you have felt the same way about Hearthstone lately, let me know in the comment section below. Did this meta make you more creative? Or did it just make you more efficient? Please feel free to share your thoughts if you watched and listened so far. And if you need some tips and tricks to reach Legend faster, watch this video next. It is a little bit older, but the same tips still apply, even in the modern meta. See you there.